The order came quietly. No shouting, no rifle raised, no guard stepping forward with a threat behind his eyes. Just 2 words, spoken by an American sergeant standing at the entrance of a room the prisoners had never seen before. Don't touch anything. The German POWs froze. They had heard those words before, in other places, in other mouths. They knew what came after. So they stood very still, hands at their sides, eyes moving slowly across the room, trying to understand what, exactly, they were not allowed to touch. And that was when the confusion began. Because the room was full of food. The camp had no name, they were told. It was a number on a document, a place that existed for administrative purposes rather than human ones. They arrived in the back of a covered truck, 12 men, knees almost touching in the middle. Nobody spoke. The road had been long, and before that there had been the surrender, which was its own kind of road, the kind you walk down once and don't come back from the same person. What they found was not what any of them had imagined. A fence, yes. Barbed wire, yes. Guard towers, yes. But also windows with glass in them. A water pump in the yard. Wooden walkways between the buildings. A place that had been thought about. Not much, but some. They were shown to a barracks. 12 bunks, each with a mattress and a folded blanket at the foot. One man reached out and pressed his hand against the nearest mattress, testing its reality. Then he pulled his hand back and said nothing. That evening, the corporal appeared at the door and said one word. Eat. They made a line, oldest to youngest, the way they had learned. The corporal waved it off. Follow. He led them across the yard to a room with long wooden tables, metal trays, metal cups, set but empty. At the far end, a serving window. Steam. Then the smell, before you could name it, the body already knew. Warm bread, something cooked in fat. Coffee. The corporal stopped at the threshold, turned and said, "Don't touch anything." Then he left. They stood very still. They stood still because that was what the order meant. Don't touch. Wait. Obey. One man closed his eyes. Another looked at the floor. They did not approach the tables. They did not look at the serving window, because looking directly at things you cannot have is a particular kind of self-punishment they had all learned to avoid. Then the window opened fully, and a face appeared. An American soldier in a white apron. He said something in English. Nobody moved. He said it again. Louder, as though louder would help. Still nobody moved. Then the cook set down his ladle, walked around from behind the window, crossed the room, and came to stand in front of them. He pointed at himself, then at the tables. Then he held out his hand. An old gesture. Universal. This way. Come. The oldest prisoner, a man in his 40s, a schoolteacher before the war, looked at the cook's outstretched hand, then at the door through which the corporal had left, then at the cook's face. The cook's face had nothing complicated in it. He was a man whose job was to feed people, and here were people. The schoolteacher took a step forward. They sat. The cook brought trays, filled cups, set a whole loaf of bread on a board with a knife beside it. The men looked at the food, then at the knife, then at each other. Nobody moved. The cook pointed at the bread and shrugged. Please, go ahead. The schoolteacher reached for the knife, slowly, and cut one piece, and set the knife back down. Then he looked at the tray in front of him. Bread, meat, something soft and yellow, cooked vegetables, a cup of something hot and dark. He looked at the cook and said in German, very quietly, as though the question itself might cause damage, "What is this for?" The cook didn't understand the words, but he understood the question. It was written in everything, in the stillness of 12 men in front of full plates, in the way they sat as though the chairs might be withdrawn. He pointed at each man, one after another, all 12, and made the same gesture each time. You, 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 for you, all of it. For you. The mechanic, sitting nearest the schoolteacher, picked up his spoon. He held it above the food, looked at the schoolteacher, who nodded. He took a small bite, set the spoon down, sat still for a moment, then picked it up and took another. After that the others began to eat. Not quickly, with a careful, suspicious slowness of people who are not yet entirely sure this is permitted. Halfway through the meal, the youngest prisoner reached for a second piece of bread. His hand stopped at the board. He looked at the schoolteacher. He said, "Is this allowed?" The school teacher said. "I don't know." The young man took the bread. Nothing happened. He ate it. Still nothing happened. They expected different food the next morning. They had reasoned it through in the barracks the night before. The first meal was the welcome meal, the tone setter, not the standard. Tomorrow would be thinner. Tomorrow would be what they had prepared themselves for. In the morning, the guard said, "Eat." The tables were set. The same cook was behind the window. The food was warm. There was bread on the board. Not the same meal, different things, different smells, but not less. They sat down faster this time. One man reached for the bread immediately, then stopped himself, then reached again more slowly. The second reaching was the important one. The first was habit. The second was a decision. After the meal, the school teacher asked the corporal through a translator, "The food, is it always like this?" The corporal said yes. The school teacher stood in the yard a long time after that, looking at the fence, listening to a bird somewhere outside it making the same sound over and over, not expecting an answer. He thought about the word yes. He thought about what it cost to say it that simply. Weeks later, the mechanic finally asked the cook what the order had meant. He couldn't ask in words. Their languages didn't meet. So he used his hands, held them up, fingers spread. The gesture of "don't touch," pointed at the food, shrugged, questioning. The cook understood. He tried to explain with slow English and gestures. The mechanic reconstructed it that evening in the barracks. The order had not been for them. The camp's medical officer had told the cook that the prisoners' stomachs were uncertain after weeks of insufficient food, that eating too fast would cause harm. The cook had been told to set the food out, step back, and let them approach at their own pace. "Don't touch anything" had meant, "don't rush them." It had been an instruction to the cook, not the prisoners. They had been obeying an order that was never directed at them. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the youngest one said, "So we could have eaten immediately." The mechanic said, "Yes." The young man said, "I waited because I was afraid." Nobody laughed. Nobody said anything. Then the school teacher said quietly, "So did I." What changed after that was not the food, which remained what it was, not the fences, which also remained. What changed was harder to name, something in the way they moved through the days, less careful, less managed. The mechanic fixed the water pump in the yard one afternoon, because it was making a sound he couldn't ignore. He asked a soldier for tools. The soldier brought them. When the pump ran quietly, the school teacher said, "Good." That was all. But the word sat in the room differently than silence. The night before the transfers came, the mechanic lay on his bunk looking at the ceiling and asked, "What do you think was the first thing? The first thing that changed how it felt?" The school teacher thought about it. The mattress. The cook's face. The word yes. The tools brought without questions. He said, "The order. The first night." The mechanic said, "We thought it meant one thing." The school teacher said yes. The mechanic said, "It meant they had thought about us. Before we arrived. They had thought about what our stomachs could manage, and made a plan for it." The school teacher said, "Yes." The mechanic said, "We weren't ready for that." The school teacher said, "No, we weren't." He closed his eyes. There was one thing the men never learned while they were in the camp. They never learned that the night before their arrival, the cook had argued with the corporal in the supply room, one man holding a clipboard, one holding a ladle, about how much to give. The corporal said, "Keep it simple. Their systems are unpredictable." The cook said, "If I'm feeding someone, I'm going to feed them." The corporal said, "There are protocols." The cook said, "There are also people." In the end, the corporal said, "Fine, but keep them back from the food until they're seated." The cook said, "I'll tell them not to touch anything." And so the order was given. And 12 men heard it, and understood it the only way they knew how, through everything that had taught them what orders meant, and what they cost to disobey. They understood it as a warning, a test. It was neither. It was a cook buying himself time to get the food to the table. That was all. And out of that small, ordinary request, 12 men stood still in a room full of food and proved something to themselves they had not intended to prove, that they still had it, whatever it was that made a person hold back at the edge of something they wanted, not from strength, from the particular kind of care that says, I will not be what I have been made to fear I am. They had not known they were proving it. The cook had not known he was giving them the chance. This is how most of the important things happen. Not in speeches, in supply rooms, in 2 words spoken at a doorway, in a ladle and a clipboard, and 2 men arguing about how much to give, and one of them saying there are also people, and meaning it, and neither of them knowing that this is the moment that will matter. Years later, the school teacher wrote to his brother. They had caraway seeds in the bread on Wednesdays. I don't know why I remember that more clearly than almost anything else from those months. He sent the letter without knowing if it would arrive. Because a letter that is sent is different from a letter that isn't, even if the difference is never confirmed. He had learned that, among other things. In the camp,